Here we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do today, this is actually, I'm so excited about this one because it brings everything together. And I think for me, this is where everything starts to make sense and we can see how it fits together. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen here, which is my lovely presentation. Let me get it out of the way. All right. Okay, so here's what we've got. We are kind of doing part 2 of verbs, but to do the part 2, we need to look at pronouns. So we're going to start with that first. But before we do, here's how everything is going to come together. We've learned about the noun, and I'm going to present the noun today as a bit of a princess. It's got a crown on its head. And we saw that the noun recruits other parts of speech, and we saw that it recruits an adjective to serve itself in different ways, to describe itself, to tell us how many there are, who belongs to, and so on, and it recruits the article. These 3 parts of speech work together like a family, and although the noun can stand on its own, the other 2 can't. They are literally in service of the noun. So here's our princess having its little servants doing all sorts of jobs for it. So what do we have next? Next, we have a pronoun. And what the pronoun does is it takes this whole thing and replaces it. So it replaces noun clauses, which is what noun phrases, which is what this thing is at the bottom, the old table, or the nouns themselves. So when this princess gets tired and says, I'm taking my ladies in waiting, you can deal with everything else. The pronoun comes in and deals with everything else. So it's like that executive assistant. And here is its purple robe, still a triangle, but purple because it's kind of a little bit more important, I guess, because it does a lot of jobs. So now the noun, we've saw that the noun recruits adjectives and articles, but then it recruits this pronoun to do all of this job. And there's one more part of speech that it recruits, and that is the preposition. And the preposition is like the marketing team. We haven't talked about it yet, but it's important to bring it here because it actually points people towards the noun or the noun phrase or the pronoun. And we have things like on the old table, on the table, above the table, under the table, next to the table. These are prepositions, and they all point to the noun. So I kind of consider it a bit like the marketing team of the noun. So this is kind of why I think this brings it all together, is because we can see that out of all 9 parts of speech, 5 of them work together. And they all are or serve the noun in some way or form. Now it's the glue. So I'll show you the next bit. The glue is the thing that makes things move. So the verb is the part of speech that makes everything do stuff. It moves it around. So I hope that this little analogy is helping you make a bit more sense of what the relationship is between all of these parts of speech. Because for me, this is exciting. I love this. This is amazing. As generally speaking, we're not taught in this way. We're kind of taught, and this is how we've covered them as well, kind of individually and on their own. But if we really look at it this way, we truly see those that belong together and their function relative to each other, not just, what's the noun, what's an adjective, and so on. All of these work together, and they're propelled by the verbs. So that's why we kind of need to cover this to move on to the next part, which is actually the pronoun part. And we need pronouns in order to examine verbs. So what is the name, or what is the job of a pronoun? They replace a noun, so noun phrases, and it avoids repetition and speaking in a third person. So for example, if I use my name, say, well, Elena woke up at 9 o'clock this morning, Elena had breakfast. It doesn't really sound very good. Now, brain doesn't like repetition, it gets bored. So the listener would lose interest in what they're hearing and kind of move on. And we don't tend to speak of ourselves in the third person anyway, because it's not appropriate. So that's the job of the pronoun. And the etymology, which is its history, covers two parts. One is the pro part, which means instead of, and noun part, which is in place of a noun. So that's its etymology. All right. Now, how is it organized? And you probably saw this before. First person, second person, third person. And, we tell children, don't write in the third person or write this in the first person. But what does it really, really mean? Well, we're going to see in a minute. That's basically how you would see it organized. What I tell my students is that pronouns are rude. They're self-centered wannabes. Why? Well, because it's all about me. It's all about them. It's about the pronoun. Everything centers around them, and they want to be everything and everyone because they take the place of everything. Well, nouns in this case. So I try to sort of insert these little funny things because it aids memory. When we are excited, when we are happy, when we are intrigued in some way, we just remember things a little bit more. So why are they rude, self-centered wannabes? We know wannabes because they want to replace all the nouns and noun phrases. So they're going to be everything. But why are they self-centered? This is how I actually work through this with my students. So I go, okay, here's singular. So singular means just me, first person. I. Well, I is at the center of its world. And I draw a picture just like this one, a little blob. I. It's at the center of its world. Everything revolves around I. It will talk about itself. It will talk about everything in terms of itself. So I is the most important thing. Well, self-important, I should say. And then I have to talk to someone because, if you're talking to yourself, there might be a problem sometimes. But it's the I talks to someone, and usually that someone is right in front of I, and we're having a conversation, a direct conversation. So here is I having a conversation with you, and this is the second person. So in relation to the first person, the you stands right in front of you, and you can see them, and you can have a conversation that is back and forth. It's mutual. So you're having a response, you're responding to them, you're asking questions, they're answering back, and vice versa. So there's a two-way conversation going on with you. But I'm going to tell you now why they're rude, or why is rude, because sometimes, or I would say oftentimes, they talk about somebody else who's not in the room, somebody who they cannot see, and somebody who cannot really respond to their conversation. So this is where the rude part comes in, because essentially what you're doing is gossiping about somebody else. Could be something else as well. But we cannot see that person or that thing that we're talking about, but we're having a conversation about it. That's the third person singular. That's just one. Singular means one. So I am having a conversation with you about it. Right. So then moving on to plural, here is multiple eyes. It wasn't enough that there was one eye where the world revolved around them. Now we've got multiple eyes, and we call those we. So that's we. And again, the world revolves around we. And we're having a conversation with you, but a bunch of yous, not just one, it's a bunch of yous. We can have just a conversation with one you, that's fine. In English, plural and singular for, or second person plural and singular are the same form. In many languages, they differ. And of course, because pronouns are rude, especially you and I, we talk about them. We talk about somebody else who's not here. And the way that I explain this to my students is in terms of the class they belong to. So for example, they might be in room 3, and next door might be room 4. And somewhere on the grounds of the school might be, room 20. They can't see the room 20. So room 3 is talking to room 4 about room 20, to just bring that sort of idea that the room includes more than one person. So this is why it's plural. So I hope this makes sense. And if you've got any questions, now it's a good time, because we're going to move on to the next little bit. All right. Awesome. All right, no questions? Cool. Right. In terms of pronouns, they have different forms and they play different roles. And this is, you're going to see something cool here. The nominative case is the subject in a sentence. It's who is doing the action. I walk, you walk, he, she, it walks, we walk, they walk, and so on. Objective case, it's actually the person or the thing that received the action is the object in a sentence. And this is where you see me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. And why we correct students from saying my friend, me and my friend, and why it's incorrect, because me, it's an object, it should receive an action, as in my mom called me, or my friend gave me. That's why we can't have me and my friend walk to school, because me is the objective case and it should be following or the receiving the action, not doing the action. So we often see that with children and we correct them. And sometimes we don't understand why we have to correct it. This is why, because if I am doing something, then it should be in the nominative case, and that form is I. If it's happening to me, then it's the objective case. And then the possessive case, which shows possession. So if I say something like, this book is mine, mine is shows who it belongs to. So it's the possessive case. All right. Any questions?
No, but that makes sense.
So these are some examples. Thank you. Some examples: we write a letter. I call mom. We wrote it, as in the letter. I called her, and the letter is mine. And then we can use this as, well, the possessive form as a subject. Yours broke down. Like if I say, oh my goodness, your car broke down, I can say yours, not your car, because then it's the your is the adjective, but yours broke down. So it takes the place of something that's come before. Okay. A little bit more on pronouns. We've got relative pronouns, and those are the ones that form questions or start a clause. So we can say, what book are you reading? In that case, it's an interrogative, but it's a relative pronoun that forms the interrogative or the question. What book are you reading right now? Another thing that actually, as a learner of English, was drilled into me quite a lot was when it's appropriate to use that or who. So for example, if we say the sentence, I read the book that you recommended. In that case, we use that because the book is an inanimate object. So we can't say, I read the book who you recommended, but we can say, I read the author who you recommended. It doesn't even actually work that way. I read the author who wrote, I don't know, the book. So we use who when we refer to people, and we use that when we refer to inanimate objects, or it could be animals or small animals or things. Inanimate objects are things. When do we use who and whom? Which is why I had to take back the first author sentence I said, because whom refers to the object. So if I said, I call my mom, whom did you call? So whom asks the questions about the object in a sentence. Who asks the questions about the subject in a sentence. Who called your mom? I did. Whom did you call? I called my mom. Can you see the distinction between these two? I'm just wanting to make sure that you are, that this is clear.
Sorry, Elena, can you just say that again? Whom refers to
the object, object in a sentence. So if I were to ask about, if I in a sentence, I called my mom. If I wanted to ask about my mom, I would say, whom did I call?
Okay.
If I wanted to ask about the subject, who called my mom? I did. Then that's the distinction.
Okay, thank you.
And then who and that. All right. Okay, perfect. Now we're into verb categories. So this is finally into our second part of verbs. Now that we've laid the foundation. The kind of categories for verbs. So as we saw last week, there are verb forms, there are verb voices and moods and all sorts. Now we're kind of taking all of these verbs and we're putting them into sort of groups, categories. The first one is action. And this is what we normally tell children is, oh, what's the action word? Can you give me an action word? And it's outward. You can see it. We usually project it outwards, and it's an external. Other people can observe it. It affects other things that can be observed. And it is about doing and moving. So things like skip, run, drive, they're outward actions. Then we've got static actions that are inward. They happen within us and they don't affect anything on the outside. They can't be observed, but they're nonetheless happening within ourselves. And they involve things like thinking, or to do with thinking, to do with decision-making, planning, organizing, all of that sort of stuff that goes on in our minds. Learning is one. You can't see someone learn. It's a static verb. And sometimes children have, younger ones particularly, have a hard time picking out verbs in sentences when they're static, because they can't see, say, oh, what's the action? Well, you can't really see thinking, that someone is thinking. You can't see that someone is feeling. But it merits the distinction because they are important. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about why they're important. When we write, when we construct sentences, static verbs are the ones that are going to give you rich writing. They are the ones that say, oh, I was pondering, why it's so humid today, or I was wondering, what I could do to make the presentation better today. Get rid of notes, I can tell you that. So they give you a little bit more richness, and the clauses that follow this, the subordinate clauses, are a little bit more, I want to say rich again, but it's not rich, just complex, more complex. And if we look at those two categories and we think about narrative writing, because it's a genre that we teach from a young age, and children engage in readily. This is how, we tell children, or we tell ourselves, we have to pace the story. A good author paces a story. Well, how do we pace a story? Well, I can tell you that a fast action part is your sort of propels the story, because it's action, verb. And then comes a static sort of period where you're using static words, where the characters or protagonists in your story are reacting to what's going on. They are responding to what's going on, whether internally or externally, but mostly internally first. They're planning the next action. So when we talk about pacing a story, pacing a narrative, You've got a period where we use action words. He jumped over the fence. He quickly ran over. He did something. He skipped over the, little puddles. So that's quick action. And then he reached the end and he said, oh, he was relieved that he escaped the dog, or, he thought, oh, how am I going to get back home? So you can see that we can have that fast action, and then a bit of a static where it's that internal dialogue and stuff is going on. I hope, and I go back to my the beginning of the, when I said that this is where everything will come together in just the most beautiful way. And that's why I get excited about parts of speech. It's not because of what they do. It's when we see it together, it starts to make sense, and it can be applied in real life situations. Right. Any questions? Cool. Right. So moving on from those sort of action and static verbs, now we move into auxiliary verbs. Now, I've got this auxiliary bit that will take us to, because I want to share this with you. So if I click on it, please let me know if you see what it came up to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it came up to etymology, Ety Online, Etym Online. And this is an amazing resource. It's free, and it basically gives you the story of a word that you're looking for. And I wanted to share this with you because I always forget. Auxiliary really means help. And if we think about the Romans, they have the auxiliary armies, or even now, if you're a reserve sort of person in the army, you could be in an auxiliary sort of group. So auxiliary means helping. And you can see here, this is why I love this, is that you can start to see that auxiliary has this root as well, aug. And we think about augment, which is down here. And then you've got all these other words, for example, that are related to this word auxiliary. I didn't know that August was. So I love using this resource. So you find all sorts of little interesting things. So basically what we're going to do, so I'm just going to go back to my little thing here, and I'm not sure if you can see verbs again.
Yep.
Yep, they are helping verbs. They form tenses. They form interrogatives. We'll see all of this, what all this means in a minute. Negatives, emphatics, and short answers. So what that means, a tense is past, present, or future. So it forms those. Interrogatives are questions. Negatives obviously that negate an action. So I will not drive, or I do not drive, that not, or do not. Emphatics are when we use things like, I do like to go to the movies. It's that sort of that do that adds the emphasis. I do enjoy going to the odd movie. Yeah. And short answers, again, have you done your homework? Yes, I have. So I have doesn't indicate possession in this case. It's just an auxiliary verb that instead of saying the whole sentence again or the whole bit again, it forms the answer. And then we've got some modals, and those are cool because you can take them and pop them into a sentence, and it changes the way that sentence feels. They normally show necessity, like, you ought to, you should. Advice, you might want to do that. Ability, can you, could you? Expectation, that could be, you should do that again. It's I'm expecting you to do that. Permission, again, you should. You could do that, you may do that. And possibility. So, and they can be inserted into any tense, as we'll see. So if I say I drive a car, you can pop can in there. I can drive a car. It doesn't actually change. The can doesn't change, and it doesn't change. It just inserted and adds another dimension to the sentence. And those are most of them. I think there are a couple of other ones, but I haven't. Oh, here we go. Now let's talk about verb tenses. This is so this presentation was created for a different purpose, and the purpose was to showcase verb tenses and show how they move through time. So just a bit of orientation for us today is that star in the middle of that is the dotted line is our timeline. The star is the present, it's right now in this minute, and the black arrows indicate when the action is taking place. So just so that you know what the little symbols mean. And we have, generally speaking, 3 time frames. We have a past, the present, and the future. And in the English language, we have 4 tenses that fit within those time frames. Simple, perfect, that's formed with the verb, auxiliary verb have, and past participle, ed or en, but other ones as well. Progressive, or sometimes called continuous, and you'll hear those 2 terms, continuous or progressive. They indicate that the action is not just starting and stopping, they indicate that the action continues and something else might happen in between. So it's a continuous type of action, or the action progresses through time. And then we've got, and that's formed with the word be and ing. And then we have the perfect progressive, which is a combination of the 2 before, using both the verb, auxiliary verb to have and to be, and ing. So now the question is, how do we know which one's which and when to use them? So here are the 12 tenses. This is like a big little, a big little thing. No, it's not little, quite big. This is, these are all the tenses that exist in English. They're 12, and these are all their forms. And we're going to look at each one of them individually. Please stop me if I'm going too fast and you've got questions.
Can you just go back to the previous slide for just 1 second?
Certainly, certainly. Let me go back to the previous one.
Object have plus be. I wish I'd known all this. I've been learning Italian for a while, and it's just, the tense is just driving me nuts. This would have really helped.
So different, exactly. So different. If you've learned a language, it's you probably would know more about tenses than you do in English, because we don't teach them in English so much. I learned them as a language learner, not as a person going to school, not as a teenager going through school in Canada. I learned them when I was learning English as a second language learner. And because in my home language, in my mother tongue, we did grammar a lot, it was easy to make the connection between the English tenses and my mother tongue. However, we don't. They differ from in different languages. You might not have a progressive, and you might not have other ones. Anyways, moving on. So here are all the forms, and we'll see when to use them, because what I'm seeing is, even as adults, we're not using them to the best of their ability of what they have to offer, and sometimes we use them in the wrong form. We can still understand one another, but why I want to learn grammar and teach grammar is because it adds a layer of precision, both of expression and understanding, to what we're reading and writing. So it just brings up the tone a little bit more, and the register. So what I mean by register is the level of formality in our speech and our written language as well. That's referred to as register. So in our daily life, we employ different registers. When we're talking to friends, we might be a bit more informal. When we're writing say a cover letter for an employment opportunity, we might be using more formal language. So that's why it's important to know, in my opinion anyway. Right, so we're back to simple tenses. So this is where it all starts, and I'll go past, present, future, and through the whole thing. Please stop me if you need to, because we're going to go through all 12 of them. So past, I ate. It's an action that is complete. It happened. It's gone. We don't have anything more to do with it. The little, these little phrases here are going to be very important very quickly, because it explains what the tense actually expresses. So pay attention to what's happening there. Then we've got present. Present is I eat for this particular one. And it indicates action that is habitual and regular. An example I give here to my students is this. If I say I walk, what do you think about? Oh, you know, you might go for a walk every day or every week, or oh, you might enjoy walking, or things that are sort of happening. You might go for a walk every morning, you might go for a walk with a friend, but it's something that will happen regularly, or some prediction, or there's a prediction that it has happened and it will happen as well. Because here I'm trying to create a distinction between present I eat and I am eating. And when we get to that tense, you'll see the difference between them, which is going to be, I think, in the next couple of slides. So you see that this action spreads around the present. It's in the past and also in the future, because it's been happening and it will happen with some regularity. And future, this action will occur at a specific time. It hasn't happened yet, but it will. All right, so that's the simple tense. And in this case, the word will is what forms the future tense. And this word, we have this word will from the past, when it indicated that we have the will to do something. It indicated the willingness to carry on a future action. And we also have the word shall, which is it's still used in a sort of posh and formal way, only in the first person. In the first person. So if I say I shall eat, we don't usually say you shall eat or he shall eat. That shall, its place is usually with the first person pronoun, on the first person position. Right, the progressive tenses. So this is when action continues. Our continuous, both terms used interchangeably. Past progressive is I was eating. It implies that this action was happening while another something happened, another action. So I was eating when you called. It implies that I will continue eating after you called as well. After I talk to you, I will still be eating because I'm not finished yet. It's a progressive action. It will progress past whatever's sort of interrupted it or happened while it was happening. Right. Present progressive or continuous, present continuous. The action started in the past and it will continue in the future. So I am eating. It implies that I was eating 2 minutes ago and I will probably continue eating. And this is where I was giving the example of walk. I walk versus I'm walking. I walk implies that there's something I do, say, every morning. Whereas if I'm walking, it's happening right now. In this present moment, I am eating. And because the present moment will pass very quickly, I will still be eating in the next moment and the next moment, and I have eaten in the one before that. That's why it's got this sort of arrow that goes from past to future. All right, future progressive. I will be eating when you call. What this means is that you will be eating, something will happen, and you'll still be eating after that. Same concept as in the past, but now we've moved that into the future. And you can see that it's the form by using will, which is the future form, and the word verb be. In this instance, be is an auxiliary verb. And if we were to analyze a piece of writing, and I was asking the children to identify the verb, I would want them to identify the whole lot. Will be eating is a verb in the future progressive tense. That whole lot, the three words together, will be eating, is the verb in that sentence, the main one anyway, because we've got another one here, just to show how that works. So I would be expecting them to give me the whole lot because it's the tense as well. All right, now into the perfect tenses, and these are formed with the word with verb have, and it's a little bit like progressive, but it's not the same implication that the action continues. And the first one is in the past, I had eaten. I had already eaten. When we go and do adverbs, there are certain adverbs that go with certain tenses, and you just heard me use one. I had already eaten before you came. So that already usually fits in with the perfect tense, but I think we'll make that a bit more clear when we do adverbs. I'm not sure if it's next week or the week after, because they all go with the different tenses. And you can see here that I've got you came, I've got a verb in the simple past that happened there, and then I had eaten before that. Present perfect. And this is a funny one because it doesn't happen in the present. Even though it's called present perfect, it's actually not in the present. I have eaten implies that it just happened. And again, you've just heard me use another adverb, just, because just goes with present perfect. I have just eaten. I have just come from outside. So even though it's present, it just happened right a minute ago. And here's where I get a bit funny. And it's a little bit of a funny thing, how we ask questions of children. So if you ask, have you cleaned your room? The nature of this tense is quite indefinite. It's not specific. You could have cleaned your room yesterday. You could have cleaned your room a little bit. You could have cleaned your room just now. But when I ask the question, have you cleaned your room? And the answer is, I have. There's a lot of room for interpretation and a lot of room for play. So children, and we're very good at it, and children are very, very good at the nuances. And they can give you an answer that can satisfy the question, have you cleaned your room, but not actually having done the work. So what's a better way of asking a question instead of, oh, have you cleaned your room? Well, it's a yes or no question, right? That you can ask. It's, did you or did you not? Or when did you clean your room? I do that with study. Have you studied? And I get the, yeah, but they could have studied like for 2 minutes or for 2 hours. It's indefinite. The nature of this tense is this sort of room. There's leaves a lot of room for play and for interpretation. So I tend to avoid it if I think it's important that I know the answer or that I get the answer that I'm looking for. I won't use it to ask, have you studied? Because the answer could be anything. Any questions? All right, I'll move on to future perfect. So again, this one, the action will be completed by the time something else will occur. So I will have eaten by the time you arrive. So there's not much to talk about there because we're going to go to these guys that combine everything now. So these are perfect progressive tenses. And the past perfect progressive tells us that the action had been happening, so it was a continuous action before something else occurred. So I had been eating fish when I swallowed the bone. So this action definitely happened. So and depending on the severity of this bone swallowing, you could continue eating beyond that, like clear my throat and move on and carry on eating. So it has a sort of implication that the action will continue unless it's severe enough in this case. All right, so we've got the present perfect progressive continuous. I have been eating cake. And what that means, the distinction here is that it stops right now. Just before I made that statement, the action has just stopped. I've been eating cake. It doesn't tell me that the action doesn't tell us the action will continue. It's, yeah, I've been eating cake. I've been eating chocolate. I've been drinking a glass of wine. Implies that it's finished. Okay.
So, Elena, can you give us like another 30 seconds for each slide?
Oh, sorry. How far do you want me to go back?
You know, that's actually the one before that. I almost finished, but not quite.
I apologize.
No, that's all right. So that was the future perfect. Future perfect. Okay, I will have each. I just want to make sure I get this because this is really going to help me with my Italian.
Oh, I'm glad. I plan to have a little sheet with, just like I've done with parts of speech, sort of take these slides and put them on a piece of paper, like on a poster type, so that it can be easily seen at a glance.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So once that's sorted, I'll just post it up where I usually do. So we've gone to this one.
Yep. I actually got that one, but
cool. And present perfect progressive.
I have eating cake. Thank you.
And future progressive, I think this is the one that we were on. Future progressive, again, continuous action, but it will stop when something else happens. So I will have been eating by the time the pizza arrives. I know that sentence, that I will have been eating already by the time the pizza arrives. So maybe the pizza is arriving too late, or maybe somebody says, "Oh, I've just ordered a pizza," and you say, "Well, I will have been eating." Those are the distinctions between the tenses and what the continuous and implies continuous action, whereas the other ones are kind of just sort of static. They happen and that's it.
Okay.
All right, so here they all are again. And what I've added here on the side is I've added the conditionals, which are these guys here, which we called verbals before. Auxiliary modals, not verbals. Sorry, I had my modals. So basically now what we can do is have a bit of a play. The only one that doesn't really affect or is not a conditional really is going to. Going to takes the place of will in the future tense. So I could say I am going to, I am only imperfect. So I'm going to. I'm going to be falling. I'm going to fall. So it's not necessarily conditional or a modal so much. Same with used to. I used to fall. And it mostly refers to the past. So it will kind of fit in this column here. The rest of the modals, they tend not to go in the past at all, because if it's a conditional, if it's a could or a would, that it cannot affect an action that's already passed. So we can't have I can fall, I can fell. It doesn't make any sense because it's already happened. You've already fallen. It's not a question of can't you. So it will they will mainly affect present and future. So we can have a bit of a sort of game with this. You ought to fall. You ought to have fallen. So I'm taking that ought to and popping it in the present. I ought to fall. I ought to have fallen. I ought to am falling. It doesn't fit there. And it probably doesn't go with this one either. I ought to have been falling. Oh, no, it does go with that one. But it's generally, they just affect present and future. Have you got any questions or anything you'd like to add or ask or comment on? Cool. I will just pop. All right. Now, this is where it all comes together. And this is another part where it's sort of we bring it all together. We don't hear this in English so much, but if you're a learner of a different language, you will hear verb conjugation. I studied French, and it was you conjugated verbs. That's what you did. What that means is you took every verb in every tense through all the pronouns. So this is where we kind of marry pronouns and verbs, and we get action. And I want to talk about the verb conjugation here. And I've got a Roman soldier on the side here, and I've got a balance or a scale over here. As I said, I often bring little bits of information, little morsels of information that they're not random. I don't want to call them random, but they're funny. So where do we get this word conjugation? What does it really mean? Well, I want to focus on this bit of the word here, jug, J-U-G. Con, before that, means together. So if I take jug here and I look at where it comes from, it's got an interesting story. So it comes from Latin. Its root is in Latin. And in Latin didn't have the sound j. It was a Y sound, so it was a y. So if you heard it in Latin, it would sound like this, jugum. And the reason we've got a soldier there is that they had these spears. And when they conquered a town or a place, they had this ritual, which was a symbolic ritual, where two spears would be placed to form a bit of a sort of a passageway. And people who had been conquered would pass under. Okay, so this thing, this little gate, was a symbol that they were now under Roman rule. And that this little arch that they formed with their spears was called a jugum. A jugum also is the cross sort of beam on the scales. That's also called the same. And other words that come from this or have this root, or they're called cognate, means that they sort of belong in the same meaning family, are words like subjugate. So to subjugate someone is to make someone a slave. But also in English, the word yoke that you put around animals to pull a cart. So around oxen, so it'll be like the yoke that goes around their their neck, that's called the yoke. And I think shirts have a yoke as well. A constructed sort of man shirt will have the yoke, not the collar, but the thing behind it that holds the collar up. So that's a little bit of a funky bit of information, which I think it's funny, and I love it, and I hope you do too. But that's why the Roman is there. So the word conjugate is to yoke together, or to it's not subjugate so much, but it is to yoke together the pronouns and the verbs. So, and I believe, no, we're not quite finished yet. So I hope you found that interesting.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So if I can, any questions or anything that jumps out? No. All right. So now we've got conjugation forms. So we've got the affirmative, which is what we've actually been doing so far. So if we look at this is all affirmative. It is happening. Now we go the the action is positive. But positive means that it exists. The action is present. Negative, it's the denying of the action, and usually has a not in it, and also the verb do with not, they form that negative. We can't say I not drive. Well, we can, but it's not, doesn't sound good. I not drive. And then we have the interrogative, which is the questioning, and we've got do you drive. And then depending on which tense we use, we can have you driven, will you be driving, and that's why we've got these other four down the bottom here as well, because when we ask a question, we can ask the question in the correct tense. So different conjugation forms. Now we've got verbals, and this is the last bit. Verbals are verbs that play the role of other things. So we've spoken briefly about this when we did nouns, that the gerund form, which is the ing form, like walking, can act as a noun. So if I used the word walking as a noun, I would say walking is a great form of exercise. And you can put it to test it and to see if it actually is a noun and can play that role. You can do two things. You can add an article. Can we say a walking or the walking? I don't know. Doesn't sound like it could. Or you can add an adjective. So can we say fast walking? All right. So it ticked that box. Therefore, it can play the role of a noun. And it can also be an adjective. So if I said a walking stick, walking describes a stick. So it's an adjective in that particular phrase. So this is where I feel that I need to make a distinction. There are two schools of thought when it comes to grammar. There's traditional and there's functional grammar. So traditional grammar refers to what we probably would have had growing up or probably heard of, where you're just studying every word, every kind of part of speech independently. Functional grammar is when you're looking at words in terms of the function they play within a phrase and relative to other parts of speech. Because in English, they're not firm. It's not like, oh, this is it, and that this can only be a noun or this can only be a verb. No, there's quite a bit of room for interpretation. And sometimes that interpretation depends on how someone personally interprets a statement. So that could be, where they think the emphasis is on in a sentence. That's called functional grammar, and it relates to how words function relative to other parts of speech. Participle, we talked about participle before, and when we talked about verb forms, that we had a sort of a present, past, and a participle form. Usually in a regular verb, we've got ed ending. So for example, played, walked, talked, no, sat, not sat. I'm looking for an ed, winked, landed. And in irregular verbs, you've got this a third form, which would be like break being the present, broke past, and broken is the past participle. And it usually acts as an adjective, aside from forming a tense, which we saw before. So sometimes we can look at these words and you go, oh, it kind of looks like a verb. So we're asking children, oh, can you pick out the action? And they look for an action. And broken, it's kind of an action, you know, to break something, but it's, in this case, it's an adjective. A broken glass, a broken car. And then we've got these lovelies here, the infinitives. And with an infinitive, you've got the word to and the verb in its present form. So it's a verb, but it's not the main action. So if I say something like this, I like to walk. To walk is an object. In that sentence, to walk, it's what I like. To walk. But it's still a verb, and it's not what is happening right now. Right now is I'm liking the walking, but I'm not walking. So what I've expected, I like to walk. The like is an internal action. It's a static action, and the walk is just something I'm talking about, not what I'm doing. But if I say, I like to walk to the park, or I like to walk home. Let's say I like to walk home. I like to walk home. To walk home is the object, but then home becomes the object of the verb to walk. So it can sort of still play the role of a verb, but it's not what is happening right this minute. I'm talking about an action. I hope that makes sense. Yep. Any questions about this? All right, so here we go. We've got verbs as nouns. Some verbs really can become nouns without having anything added on them. So I like to go, I'm going for a walk. If I can pop an article or an adjective in front of it, then it's a noun. In this case, the clue here that this is a noun is the fact that it's got an article, walk. So in this sentence, I don't even need to do anything other than go, a walk. Those two go together. Therefore, a walk must be a noun. Then we've got things like the drive was spectacular. Well, you can look at somebody, ask a child to identify your verb, and they'll go for drive because it's an action that can be seen and it's something that they associate with an action. But in this case, it's not the action because it's got a the. It's a clue that this is a noun, and the verb is actually was. Yeah. And I've got a couple more examples here. I enjoyed the talk. Talk is an action, but in this case, it's not. It's a noun, and it's the talk as a whole is an object because it's what I enjoyed. And this one here, sleep sneaks up on you. Sleep is we can test it by adding an article like the sleep sneaks up on you. Kind of makes sense. Sleep sneaks up on you. It's an uncountable noun, so you can't really put but we can say the, even though that doesn't sound very sophisticated. But if we're not sure, we can always add an adjective. So I don't know, can we say big sleep sneaks up on you, or slow sleep, or I can't think of anything at the moment that would make more sense with that. And that's how we can test if something is a noun. Add an article or an adjective and see if it fits. And okay, great. Why do we need to know this? Well, as I said before, it refines thinking and allows us a precision of expression that it just gives us control over how we express what we think, how we form our arguments. It does bring about better writing, because if we think in terms of a narrative piece, if you can give a series of actions, children write in the past tense and go, I played with my sister, we went to this, we had ice cream. It's all sort of boring because it's all in the past tense. But if we start mixing it up a little bit and we say, I went for an ice cream before we did something else, or we had already had ice cream by the time my sister arrived, then it just brings a little bit more interest to that reading, to that writing that they're doing. Another reason is that it really, you have a chance to control the tone and register is a formality of our expression, and the tone is basically the image that we want to portray, what we want to be, and to have an elevated tone. It's still formality to a certain extent. Yeah, it helps comprehension tremendously. I cannot say enough about this knowledge aiding your comprehension. And again, I'll say I work with my high school kids, and if I get them to read their instructions or even a word problem, pick out the keywords. How do they know what keywords? We say, oh, what's the keyword? Well, I don't know, because to me, a keyword could be anything. If I'm looking for, adjectives or facts, those are my keywords. But if we really look at nouns and verbs, those are your keywords. When you strip away everything off a sentence, the skeleton that's left are usually nouns and verbs. If you can pick out those, then you get the gist of what's going on. Another reason is it's easier to learn another language. If you know your own grammar, then all you do is you just pop things into your own sort of scheme of things. Your predetermined boxes that we've created, and it's easier to make things fit and also understand the differences and nuances of the other language that you're learning. That's another. Most of this stuff around verbs is genre specific. So if we are teaching, I talked about narrative and how we can pace a narrative using different types of verbs. At every point in your narrative hill, and what I mean by narrative hill is, what we teach usually, introduction, rising action, climax, denouement, and conclusion. That's a sort of story hill. A verb or different kinds of verbs fit at different parts of that hill. So if we're looking at introducing characters, you're probably going to use a lot of sort of is, was, has, sort of internal verbs, and they're usually in the past tense, simple. And as action happens, you can start playing with tenses. So you can have things happening before and after something, while something else is happening, so that you're pacing it in that sense. And then as you reach the end towards denouement, then again, you head into those simple tenses. So each stage in the narrative will have its own sort of set of what works best, of a tense that works best, or set of tenses. And when we do adverbs, we will see that adverbs go with certain tenses as well. So if we're writing a descriptive piece, it's usually in the present tense, because it's just we're describing something, or maybe in the past tense, without a lot of variation, but a lot of sort of feelings, so a lot of static verbs. If we're writing an explanation text, that will have a lot of active and static, but mostly active and active voice, which means, you know, the bird has feathers, the bird raises its chicks in a nest. So it's present tense. So there's specific tenses there as well. So if we know this, we can teach genre a lot better and a lot more explicitly. And I have a little note there in purple, allows us to play jazz. And I use this a lot, and I'm not sure if there's anybody who's a piano player here or has learned piano before. Jazz is a lot about improvisation, but you have to really be a great piano player and understand how the piano works and understand the theory behind how to make music with piano in order to be able to play jazz. What I'm trying to say here is that if we understand how something works really, really well, we can start being creative with language. And this is where you get, you can write amazing poetry. You can start placing adjectives in front of nouns. Oh, no, behind nouns. Usually in English, we've got them in front of the noun, like the red ball. What happens if you place it the other way? What if you go, the ball, red? Oh, it doesn't work. But if I said the ball, red and bouncy, is a great toy. Immediately we can see that if we start switching things around and playing with them, we can start to play jazz, which is improvisation, but it's improvisation that works and creates interest and brings another dimension to our writing. Some fun things. Got more fun things today. So we've got some verb specific suffixes, phi, for example, and we've got like an adjective plus phi, you get a verb. So we can create verbs by adding phi, simplify, clarify. We can do that to nouns. We can have a noun plus phi and create a verb. And again, with eyes or ice, we can do the same. So we can actually create verbs out of other parts of speech because we can. And English is very fun like that. You can do a lot of things. It's very flexible. And I think that's one of the reasons why it is such a popular language that, you know, 4 billion people on the face of the earth speaks English. And it's a language that's growing in terms of how many people speak it. It's easy to get around it. It's flexible. It's adaptive to the space and the place, to people. So it's the reason why it's been so successful. And it's in all ways, it's very concise and precise. Right, just seeing if you've got any questions, because there's one last slide, and the slide is, which one do we use? We've got this eyes, ice, and ice. So there's a common thought that eyes is the American spelling and ice is the British spelling, the English spelling. It's not true. It's Cambridge versus Oxford. I don't know which one's which, but that's where it started. It was Cambridge University using one spelling and Oxford using another, and it was the battle between the universities. And somehow it got translated as it's American, the American. Both are correct. And you know, its preference is based on what you'd like to use, either Z or S spelling. It doesn't matter. But what matters is this CE spelling. So which one do we use? Practice or practice? Advice or advise? And there is a sure way to tell this. One is a verb, the other one is a noun. So nouns are ice. So if I think about ice is a noun, you know, like ice cream, it's a thing. So I will use ice. Eyes is the verb. And you can sort of hear it slightly in how we say it. If we say advice, and this is advise, so it's got a voiced sound. Device, devise. I have devised a plan. License, license, that sounds the same. So there is no distinction in pronunciation, but the SE or ZE is the, well, not ZE, but SE is the verb spelling, and CE is the noun spelling. And that's it for today. My goodness, that was a lot.
Was a lot.
Yeah. Usually I try to keep it to an hour, but clearly not today.
Well, that was awesome. No, thanks, Selena.
You are very welcome. I'm going to stop the recording and